The Apache girl was brought to hang, but the gallows broke before they touched her neck. The sun beat down on Fort Defiance, a relentless hammer on the dusty parade ground, baking the earth until it radiated heat in shimmering waves. The air, thick with the scent of dry pine, the metallic tang of fear, and the faint, acrid smell of sweat and unwashed bodies, shimmered above the assembled crowd, distorting the distant mountains into hazy mirages. Soldiers in crisp, starched blue uniforms, their brass buttons glinting like tiny suns, stood shoulder to shoulder with grim-faced townsfolk, their expressions a mixture of morbid curiosity, stern resolve, and a chilling, almost celebratory anticipation. All eyes were fixed with an unblinking intensity on the makeshift gallows, erected with crude haste in the very center of the square. It was a stark, skeletal structure, hastily built from rough-hewn, unseasoned timber, its dark crossbeam silhouetted starkly against the unforgiving, brilliant Arizona sky, a grim, geometric intrusion on the natural world. A single rope, thick and new, its hemp fibers still stiff and unyielding, hung ominously from its center, swaying almost imperceptibly in the hot, dry breeze, a silent, chilling promise of death. A profound hush fell over the crowd, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the very air from the square as the procession emerged from the fort's main gate. The rhythmic thud of cavalry hooves on the parched earth was the only sound. At its head rode Captain Elias Thorne, his face a granite mask of unyielding duty, his uniform impeccable despite the pervasive dust that coated everything in this desolate outpost. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, betraying no emotion. Behind him, flanked by two armed cavalrymen whose faces were impassive under the wide-brimmed hats that cast deep shadows over their eyes, walked the condemned. She was an Apache girl, barely 18 summers old, her slender frame seeming almost fragile against the vast, indifferent landscape that stretched to the horizon. Her traditional buckskin dress, intricately adorned with simple, natural dyes and meticulous beadwork that told stories of her people, had been replaced by a coarse, ill-fitting shift of rough homespun, a deliberate act of dehumanization meant to strip her of her identity and dignity. Her long black hair, usually braided with meticulous care and gleaming with natural oils, hung loose and tangled, matted with the grime of the prison cell, dull and lifeless against her dark skin. Her wrists were bound tightly in front of her with rough cord, the knots digging into her flesh, and her ankles were shackled with heavy clanking iron, forcing her to take small, shuffling steps, each one a painful struggle against the unyielding metal. Yet, despite the crushing humiliation, the profound physical discomfort, and the imminent, terrifying threat of oblivion that loomed over her, her head remained held high, her chin tilted slightly upward, a silent, defiant gesture. Her dark eyes, though shadowed with the deep exhaustion of sleepless nights and unrelenting fear, held a flicker of defiance, a spark of unbroken spirit, a quiet fire that even the most hardened onlookers, those who had seen much suffering and much death, could not ignore. She was accused of raiding a settler's homestead, of murder and theft, grave charges she had steadfastly denied with a quiet, unwavering resolve, her silence interpreted by her accusers as stubborn guilt, a refusal to acknowledge her crimes, further cementing their conviction of her savagery. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a low, murmuring tide of anticipation, grim satisfaction, and a chilling sense of finality that settled over the square like a shroud. This was justice, they believed, a necessary act to tame the wild, lawless frontier, to send a clear, brutal message to any who dared defy their authority, to assert the dominance of the white man's law. For too long, the Apache had been a shadowy presence, a constant, unpredictable threat on the edges of their burgeoning settlements. And now, one of them would pay the ultimate price, a life for a life, a symbol of their subjugation. The girl ascended the steps of the gallows with a quiet, almost regal dignity that seemed to mock the rough, splintered planks beneath her bare feet, each step a testament to her unyielding spirit. Each step was deliberate, unhurried, a silent testament to an inner strength that defied her physical bonds, a walk of quiet courage. The hangman, a burly, anonymous figure, whose face was completely obscured by a dark, coarse hood, stood waiting at the top, his hands already reaching for the rope, his movements practiced and chillingly efficient, a faceless instrument of death. Captain Thorne dismounted from his horse, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel of the parade ground, the sound sharp and intrusive in the hushed air. He moved to the base of the gallows, his posture rigid, his face impassive, a perfect soldier. His voice, usually resonant and commanding, was now stiff with formality, devoid of emotion, a mere recitation of legalistic terms as he read the charges, the solemn pronouncement of guilt, and the final, unalterable sentence of death, by hanging until dead. His words echoed across the square, flat and unyielding, sealing her fate with cold, legalistic precision, a decree from a distant, unfeeling authority. The crowd listened, some nodding grimly in agreement, their faces set in hard lines, others shifting uncomfortably, a few with a dawning sense of unease, a flicker of doubt in their eyes, a whisper of conscience. The hangman adjusted the noose, its rough hemp, scraping softly against itself as he prepared the precise knot, the hangman's knot, designed for swift, brutal efficiency, a macabre art. The girl stood, perfectly still, her gaze sweeping slowly over the sea of faces in the crowd, not with accusation, but with a quiet, almost detached observation, as if she were merely a witness to her own demise, an observer of human cruelty. She saw the fear, the hatred, the morbid curiosity, and the rare, fleeting glimpse of pity, a brief, fragile connection in a vast, hostile sea of faces. As the hangman slipped the noose over her head, the rough rope chafing against the delicate skin of her neck, a cold, unyielding embrace, her eyes closed for a brief, almost imperceptible moment. It was a silent breath taken, a final moment of introspection before the end, a quiet surrender not to her captors, but to the inevitable. Her hands, still bound tightly, remained clasped in front of her, a small, defiant gesture of composure, a last shred of control. The hangman tightened the knot, adjusting it precisely behind her ear, ensuring its deadly efficacy, ensuring a quick, brutal end. A collective, audible intake of breath swept through the crowd, a wave of anticipation, a shared moment of morbid suspense. The moment had arrived, poised on the brink of irreversible finality, the silence stretched taut, ready to snap. Then a sound. Not a shout, not a cry of protest, not the expected creak of the trap door, but a deep, resonant crack. It was a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the silent square, ripping through the oppressive stillness like a sudden, violent thunderclap, startling everyone. It was the unmistakable sound of splintering timber, of something giving way under immense, unbearable strain, a sound of wood screaming in protest. The gallows, the hastily constructed symbol of frontier justice, groaned loudly, a tortured sound of protest from the wood itself, as if the very structure rebelled against its purpose. A large crack, jagged and dark, appeared in the main crossbeam, spreading rapidly from the very point where the rope was attached, like a spiderweb of destruction across the dark wood. Dust, dry and ancient, dislodged from the timbers, showered down onto the platform and the hangmen below, coating them in a fine, gritty powder. The entire structure swayed violently, lurching precariously to one side, threatening to collapse in a heap, a monument to its own failure. The hangman, startled by the sudden, unexpected movement, stumbled back, his hands flying up in surprise, his hood momentarily dislodged, revealing a glimpse of wide, frightened eyes. The rope, still around the girl's neck, went slack as the crossbeam sagged precariously, its deadly purpose momentarily thwarted by the failing wood, a sudden, inexplicable reprieve. A wave of confusion swept through the crowd, replacing their grim anticipation with bewildered murmurs and disjointed exclamations. Whispers erupted, louder this time, tinged with disbelief and a growing sense of unease, a ripple of superstition that spread like wildfire. The gallows, meant to be unyielding, a steadfast instrument of law and order, had failed. It was an omen, some murmured, a sign from the ancient spirits of the land, a supernatural intervention against the proceedings, a divine judgment. Captain Thorne, his face now etched with a different kind of tension, not just duty, but profound frustration and a dawning sense of the inexplicable, a challenge to his rational mind, barked urgent orders for his men to stabilize the structure. Soldiers rushed forward, grabbing at the swaying timbers, their faces reflecting their own confusion and alarm, trying desperately to prevent a complete and humiliating collapse that would undermine all authority. The girl, still standing on the platform, was momentarily off balance, but remained upright, her composure unbroken by the chaos unfolding around her. Her eyes, which had snapped open at the sound of the cracking wood, now held a bewildered expression, a flicker of something, akin to surprise, perhaps even a nascent hope, a spark of life rekindled. The noose, though still around her neck, was loose, its deadly purpose momentarily thwarted, its power diminished, an inert symbol of a failed execution. The hangman, recovering his composure, moved to retighten it, his movements now hesitant, almost reluctant, as if he too felt the weight of the strange occurrence, the chilling hand of fate. But the gallows continued to groan, its structural integrity fatally compromised beyond repair. Another, louder crack echoed across the square, a sharper, more definitive sound, like a gunshot, and a section of the main crossbeam splintered completely, tearing away from the rest of the structure with a sickening rip and falling to the ground with a dull, heavy thud, raising a small cloud of dust that momentarily obscured the scene. The entire structure leaned precariously, threatening to topple over completely, a monument to its own spectacular failure. It was undeniably clear that the gallows could not hold, its purpose irrevocably broken, its timbers shattered. Captain Thorne, his face now a mask of profound frustration and a dawning sense of the impossible, of forces beyond his control, realized the utter futility of their efforts. The execution could not proceed, not with the collapsing gallows. It would be a mockery of justice, a public spectacle of weakness and incompetence, undermining the very authority they sought to assert over the wild frontier. He bellowed for the girl to be taken down immediately, his voice hoarse with exasperation, for the gallows to be dismantled, its broken pieces removed from sight, erased from memory. The cavalrymen, their faces reflecting a mixture of profound relief and lingering confusion, moved quickly to obey, untying her bound wrists and gently guiding her down the rickety, unstable steps of the failing structure, away from the precipice of death. The crowd watched in stunned, hushed silence as the girl, still shackled at the ankles, was led away from the broken gallows. She was not free, her ankles still bound by iron, a prisoner still, but she was undeniably alive, granted an unexpected reprieve, a second chance. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the heavy weight of an unexpected twist of fate, a moment that defied all logic and expectation. It was a moment that seemed to resonate with the ancient, untamed spirit of the land itself, a land that had seemingly rejected the act of violence, a silent protector. The sun continued its slow descent towards the western horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the scene, as if marking a profound turning point in the day, and perhaps in the destiny of the fort itself, a shift in the very fabric of reality. The girl was returned to her cell, the iron door clanging shut behind her with a hollow, echoing finality that resonated through the stone walls. Captain Thorne, meanwhile, found himself facing a profound dilemma, a challenge to his very understanding of order and justice, a crisis of conscience. The gallows had broken, preventing the execution, but the sentence of death remained, a legal decree that could not simply be ignored, a stain on the ledger. He could not simply release her. The charges against her were grave in the eyes of the settlers, their demands for retribution loud and insistent, a clamor for blood. Yet, to rebuild the gallows immediately, to attempt the execution again so soon, would be seen as a desperate, almost superstitious act, an admission of weakness and a further mockery of their authority, fueling the growing unrest. The incident had deeply unsettled the town, stirring old superstitions and planting insidious seeds of doubt about the righteousness of their cause, about the very foundation of their law. Days turned into a week, each one adding to the tension, stretching the nerves of everyone in Fort Defiance. The broken gallows remained a stark, unsettling reminder in the center of the square, its splintered timbers lying in a heap, a silent, undeniable monument to a thwarted execution, a symbol of their impotence. Captain Thorne found himself under increasing pressure from all sides, a man caught between the demands of the law and the whispers of the supernatural. The local magistrate, Judge Harlan, a portly man with a nervous tic that seemed to worsen with each passing day, urged him to proceed quickly, to re-establish order and demonstrate firm control, to quell the rising tide of discontent. The settlers, their anger simmering just beneath the surface, their demands for justice growing louder and more vocal, became more insistent in their discontent, their voices a constant drone, but a quiet, persistent undercurrent of unease, a feeling of supernatural intervention, persisted among some of the soldiers and townsfolk, a growing conviction that perhaps the breaking of the gallows was indeed a sign, a divine or spiritual intervention against an unjust act, a message from the land itself. During this time of uncertainty and mounting pressure, the girl, whose name was Ayanna, remained in her cell, a quiet, stoic presence amidst the turmoil. She ate the meager rations without complaint, drank the stale water, and waited with a quiet patience that belied her youth, a stillness that seemed to draw strength from the very earth. Her mind, sharp and resilient, replayed the events of that fateful day, searching for meaning in the unexpected reprieve, a thread of hope in the darkness, a path forward. She knew the reprieve was temporary, a mere delay in her ultimate fate, a fleeting moment of respite, but it was a delay nonetheless, a precious chance, however slim, to alter her destiny, to find a way to survive. Captain Thorne, a man of logic, order, and rigid military discipline, found himself wrestling with the inexplicable, with a force that defied his rational understanding, a challenge to his very being. He had always dismissed the Apache spiritual beliefs as primitive superstition, the ramblings of an uneducated people. But the gallows' sudden, inexplicable collapse had profoundly shaken his rigid worldview, cracking the very foundations of his certainty, forcing him to confront the unknown. He began to question the circumstances of Ayanna's capture, the validity of the evidence presented against her, the very foundation of the accusations that had led her to the gallows. The homesteader, a man named Jedediah Colt, had been remarkably quick to accuse, his story perhaps too neat, too eager, too perfectly aligned with the prevailing prejudices against the Apache. Thorne, driven by a nagging sense of doubt, a persistent unease in his gut, sent out patrols, not just to search for new timber to rebuild the gallows, but to revisit the site of the alleged raid, to meticulously look for details that might have been overlooked or deliberately obscured in the initial rush to judgment, in the haste to condemn. His patrols returned with unsettling findings, reports that chipped away relentlessly at the official narrative, exposing its flaws. The tracks around the homestead were indeed Apache, but they were old, days older than Colt's reported raid, suggesting a timeline discrepancy that could not be ignored. The signs of struggle at the cabin were minimal, almost staged, lacking the chaotic brutality one would expect from a violent attack, raising a chilling suspicion. And the stolen goods were common, easily acquired items, not the kind of valuable plunder a raiding party would typically seek, further raising suspicion about Colt's true motives. The more Thorne investigated, the more the carefully constructed narrative of Ayanna's guilt began to unravel, exposing its fragile, fabricated core, revealing a deeper, darker truth. Ayanna's story, quietly recounted to a sympathetic guard during the long, silent nights, spoke of a solitary hunting trip, of returning to find her family's camp deserted, their cooking fire cold, their belongings scattered, a scene of desolation. She spoke of following faint, almost invisible tracks that led her far from their usual territory, a desperate search for her loved ones, eventually bringing her close to Colt's homestead just as a military patrol stumbled upon her. She had been found near the scene, a convenient scapegoat, a ready-made villain for a narrative of frontier violence, a perfect target for those seeking blame. Captain Thorne now understood with a chilling clarity that settled deep in his bones. Jedediah Colt, a man known for his ruthless land-grabbing ambitions and his history of manipulating situations for his own gain, had likely staged the raid himself, perhaps even killed his own family, to justify a false claim against the Apache, to incite a conflict that would drive them from their ancestral lands, clearing the way for his own expansion and profit. Ayanna had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a tragic victim of a calculated, cold-blooded deception, an innocent caught in a web of greed and prejudice. The gallows had broken not by mere chance, not by a flaw in the wood, but by a deeper, unseen force, a cosmic intervention against a grave, impending injustice, a silent protest from the very land itself, a land that cried out for truth. Thorne confronted Judge Harlan with his damning findings, laying out the evidence with meticulous precision, leaving no room for doubt. The judge, his face paling to an ashen gray, tried desperately to dismiss the evidence, clinging to the official narrative, to the comfort of established prejudice, to the lies he had allowed to fester. But Thorne's resolve was unyielding, his conviction fortified by the undeniable truth that he had uncovered. He presented the inconsistencies, the fabricated evidence, the clear, undeniable motive of Jedediah Colt, a portrait of a calculating villain. The judge, seeing his own complicity and the potential for scandal exposed, finally relented, though with ill grace, his authority crumbling before the overwhelming weight of undeniable truth. The next morning, the square at Fort Defiance was again filled with people, a larger crowd than before, drawn by the whispers of change, by the promise of something different. But this time, there were no gallows, only the empty space where it had stood, a void where death had almost claimed an innocent life. Captain Thorne stood before the assembled crowd, his voice clear, strong, and imbued with a new sense of moral authority, a man transformed by his experience. He announced that new, compelling evidence had come to light, that the charges against Ayanna were entirely unfounded, that she was unequivocally innocent. He spoke of a grave injustice, of a man who had manipulated the law for his own cruel gain, twisting it to serve his avarice and hatred. He then ordered the immediate arrest of Jedediah Colt, the true perpetrator, his words ringing with righteous indignation. A murmur of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd, followed by a growing wave of understanding, a collective sigh of relief that swept through the square. Some grumbled, still clinging to their ingrained prejudices, their faces set in stubborn lines of resentment. But many felt a profound sense of relief, a lifting of the grim shadow that had hung over the fort and their consciences. Justice, true justice, was a complex, often elusive thing in this wild land, a delicate balance between law and morality. But today, against all odds, it had found its way. Ayanna was brought forth from the fort, no longer in chains, her head still held high, her dark eyes now shining with a quiet triumph, a silent victory. Her eyes met Captain Thorne's, and in their depths, he saw not just profound gratitude, but a quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the profound, almost mystical forces that had intervened on her behalf, a bond forged in shared experience. She was given back her buckskin dress, her few meager possessions, symbols of her identity and her heritage, restored to her. She turned towards the vast, shimmering desert, the land of her ancestors, a land that had seemingly protected her, a silent guardian, a benevolent spirit. Captain Thorne watched her go, a solitary figure walking towards the distant horizon, her silhouette gradually disappearing into the shimmering heat haze, becoming one with the landscape. The broken gallows remained, a stark reminder of a near tragedy, but now it stood not as a symbol of failure or incompetence, but as a monument to a strange, miraculous reprieve, a testament to a justice that transcended human law, a divine intervention. The incident became a legend whispered around campfires, a tale of the Apache girl brought to hang, of the gallows that inexplicably broke, and of the unexpected, almost divine justice that followed. It was a story that spoke of the deep, mysterious connection between the land and its people, of forces beyond human comprehension, and of the quiet courage of a few who dared to see the truth, to challenge the prevailing darkness, to stand for what was right. Fort Defiance, scarred by its past injustices, began a slow, arduous process of healing and introspection, a difficult journey towards redemption. The relationship between the soldiers and the Apache remained fraught with tension, a fragile peace. But a crack had appeared in the formidable wall of animosity, a glimmer of possibility for understanding, a nascent hope for coexistence. Captain Thorne, forever changed by the extraordinary events, continued his duty with a new perspective, a deeper understanding of the complexities of justice in a wild, untamed land, a wisdom born of experience. He learned to listen to the whispers of the wind, to the subtle signs of the desert, and to the quiet dignity and enduring spirit of a people who had endured centuries of hardship, a resilience that humbled him. The Gallows was eventually dismantled, its broken timbers repurposed, its dark history a lesson etched into the collective memory of the fort, a reminder of a time when justice almost failed. But the legend of the Apache girl and the breaking gallows lived on, a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unpredictable, often miraculous, hand of fate in the untamed American West.